Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending upon where you're joining us from. It's your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I am so excited to be back with you for another episode of the BGC Book Club. So please come on in the room, invite your friends, especially those who love romance stories. Go ahead and invite your friends, like and share this out because this is going to be a great conversation with someone who is many of you all's personal favorite romance writer. Actually, I didn't tell her this, but when I put up the post about it, one of my friends that I've known since junior high said, "Oh, I love her. I got to make sure I'm in the room." So I hope that she's here. So I'm coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, originally from Cleveland, Ohio. And again, I consider it an honor to be here with you weekly to share books that are written by, for, and about us. And tonight's book is no different. So tonight, I consider it an honor to have the one and the only Jasmine Guillory with us. She is a New York Times bestselling author whose novels include Drunk on Love, The Wedding Date, and the Reese's Book Club selection, The Proposal. Her work has been appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Cosmopolitan, Bon Appetit, and Time. She is a frequent book contributor on the Today Show and lives in Oakland, California. And tonight we're going to be talking about her latest, and I wouldn't say greatest necessarily, but it's the latest and greatest. And that is Flirting Lessons. So let's get ready to get into it with Jasmine Guillory. Welcome to BGC Book Club.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and I said not greatest necessarily, but that is because you have so many books. It's hard to name which one is the greatest. So let me be clear on that. So what do you mean it's not the greatest? Because you have so many, it's hard to choose. So first of all, I want to welcome you for being here. I know we've been working on this and waiting on this date for a while, so I consider it an honor to have you here, Jasmine.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And thank you for having me. I loved seeing the pictures of all of the authors who've been on, partly just because I was like, oh, those are so many of my author friends. So yes. It was nice to see everybody and I'm excited to be able to join the group.
Yes. I actually need to update that because there are more. I don't know if you know, I've done this over 300 times. So yeah,
wow, that's a lot. That's incredible.
So shame on me for just getting you here for the first time. But welcome. I consider it an honor. We met back at the end of May at the Black Romance Book Fest, and so it's exciting to actually.
That was such a good time. I had a great time.
It was a great time. So, Flirting Lessons has been out in the world for a few months, and So I would ask, how does it feel? But it's been out for a little bit. So this book how has it been just, going out and talking about flirting lessons, over the last several months?
It's always so good. I think writing can be a kind of lonely profession, right? Especially you're living with this book for, usually anywhere from like a year to a few years before it's out in the world. And it's always so nice to be able to get to talk about it with other people, get to meet readers, get to go to different parts of the country and see kind of really the impact that my books have had on other people and get to talk about, because also I was a reader long before I was a writer. And so it's so fun to get to talk to other readers and find out, what else are you reading? What else should I be reading? That kind of stuff. And so I've had I had a really great time on the Flirting Lessons book tour. And I have a bunch more travel coming up this fall. So I'm hoping to get to meet even more readers this fall. So I always have just such a great time when I get to talk to other readers. Also, I need to apologize if you hear my dog in the background. There are always dogs walking by my house at this time of day, and she feels compelled to say hi to them.
Yeah, no worries. That reminds me, when I was growing up, my dog would do that from my parents' bedroom.
Yeah,
barking at people walking down the street. So that's quite all right. So yes, it is a pleasure to be able to get out and meet authors as well. So just Flirting Lessons, give us a little synopsis of what it's about for those who may not have had a chance to read it.
Yeah, Flirting Lessons is about Avery and Taylor. Avery has kind of recently been through a breakup. She wants to kind of get back out there, but she doesn't quite know how. She's a very buttoned up, straight laced kind of person. She wants to be more free, flirt with people, meet a bunch of people, but she's not good at any of that. And so she confesses all of this to Taylor early on in the book. And Taylor, who is very good at all of that, is like, oh, well, I could teach you how to flirt. And so then they embark on a series of flirting lessons, and then romance ensues.
Romance ensues. Yes, I love that. So, what was the inspiration for this particular story?
So there were a few little kind of bits that kind of started off the story. First, and this was a long time before I actually started writing it, a few years before, I go on an annual writing retreat with some other writer friends. And a few years ago, we were driving to the retreat, and the two of them were talking about a friend they have in common that I don't know. And one said to the other about them, like, oh, well, she breaks a lot of hearts. And I immediately pulled out my phone and wrote that down, because I was like, that's such an interesting kind of story about someone, right? That like a friend of yours would say that casually about you, like, oh, she breaks a lot of hearts. And then like, who is that person? How do they break a lot of hearts? And then what happens when they fall in love? Like, that sounds like a fun story to tell. And also that just sounds like a fun character. Like, who is that character, right? It's an interesting thing to think about. So I kind of wrote that down, but didn't really, I was working on a different book at the time. I didn't really have that in mind. I was just kind of, that's a good thing to think about in the future. And then I was working on Drunk on Love.
Yes.
Which is kind of in the series with Flirting Lessons. And Avery and Taylor are both characters in that book. And when I first, Avery a little bit more than Taylor. Taylor's more of a minor character. But when I first wrote Taylor, I was like, oh, she's the one. Okay. She's the one who breaks a lot of hearts. And so then I was like, what is the story I'm going to tell about her? And then I was like, I kind of wanted to put her with someone who was her opposite, right? Someone who has never broken a heart before, doesn't even know how to do it, is not a big flirt, but kind of wants to know it. And how would I put this together? And I've always kind of loved the kind of like dating lessons is kind of a trope in romance, which is one that I've always kind of loved. I think it's fun to think, and also to think about, like, how would you teach someone else, right? Like, what are the things that, especially since everyone's a little different, how would you go about this? And so it was really fun to kind of think of bringing the two of them together, especially since they're very different characters. Like, what would they like about each other? What are the things that would kind of spark in the other one, and to think about like what the specific flirting lessons would be, right? Like, what would Taylor teach Avery? What would be hard for Avery to get, and what would be easier for her, And so that was kind of fun to kind of think about how I would do all of that.
Yes. And it's funny because my mom and I were having a conversation about the book earlier and thinking about flirting. And, she's like, well, if I'm giving people compliments, do they think I'm flirting? I'm like, Ma, there's a difference.
Well, okay. Do you know what's so funny is that my mom, after she read the book, she was like, I wish I had known all of this for a long time ago. And my sister and I are like, what are you talking about? You were the biggest flirt that both of us know. And she was like, what do you mean? I just talk to people. And we're like, yeah, you flirt with everybody. That's why everybody likes you. You're good at this. But she doesn't even kind of think of it in that.
Right. It's how you talk to people. Yeah. Because it can be like, oh, that's a nice shirt, or oh, that's a nice shirt.
Yeah.
It's an inflection, like, do you touch the shirt? Do you like, there's definitely a difference in what it means to flirt versus just being a person who gives compliments all the time. So now, of course, in the story, we have not specifically stated this as of yet, but Avery and Taylor are in a same-sex relationship. So that is something that's a little different from some of the other, I should say, full-fledged books that you have written.
Yes, that is the this is the first same-sex relationship book that I have written.
So what was it that inspired you to want to tell the story? Because I've already told you this. I'm just going to say it up front. I think it's refreshing because everyone deserves to have a good story to read. But for you personally, what was it that made you want to lean into telling this story?
I'd wanted to tell one for a while. I feel like there's kind of so many interesting things in there, right? Because I think it's a different kind of relationship. I think women communicate in a different way with one another than they do with men. And so kind of thinking, how would that be different? How would I tell that story? And also I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I see so many same-sex relationships around me all the time, that it felt natural to tell a story like that.
Mm-hmm. And as I said, it's good that you did because everyone deserves to have a story told and it's done in such a way. And you're right, as I was reading, just thinking about the different things of what it would be to like pursue a different type of relationship from what you're used to. Because from the standpoint of Avery, she is going into a world that's not necessarily familiar to her.
Right.
And a lot of times as women, we're used to being the pursued and not necessarily being the pursuer. So how does it maybe look a little bit different when you're not, okay, I'm just waiting for that guy to come over here and talk to me. But if you're interested in dating women, there isn't that necessarily. Right. So how do you express that interest or let someone know that you're interested in them?
Yeah. And then also sort of because also Avery presents as very straight, right? And so like, how does she signal to other women like, oh, I might be interested? And so there's all that kind of stuff too. But I think some of it is, you talked about like there's a difference between flirting and just talking to people. Yes, there is, but also I feel like talking to people is the first step, right? And I think that's often like one of the harder barriers to get over because people are, everyone is scared of rejection. Everyone is scared that that someone isn't going to want to talk to them, isn't going to be friendly. And I think, and that's one of the first things that Avery has to get over. Like, Taylor tells her, like, first off, we're just going to make you talk to people. Right. And Avery's like, what? How many people do I have to talk to? And so I think that, that's kind of one of the first things she has to learn is before even the flirting just comes like getting easy talking to people. And then we'll teach you how to put your hand on someone's shoulder, like,
right, exactly.
Like your shirt and the shirt instead of just say, I like your shirt. Like some of those.
Yeah, there are levels to it. There are definitely levels to it. But, just thinking about that because, Avery is an entrepreneur and she's a party planner. So you would think that somebody that's a party planner has this great and bubbly and, you're used to talking to people and having to interact, to get business, to show up at the parties and command, different things in that space. But what you do professionally and how you show up personally are two totally different things.
100%. Yeah. And I think also sometimes, because like often to be an entrepreneur, you have to be able to be very organized, right? You're your one woman show. Maybe you have a assistant or something, but like you're organized, your business, like you're on it. Especially as a party planner, right? You have to be the organized one and figure out where everybody's going. And so, yes, you're good at talking to people, but in a like, oh, okay, it's time for you to go over here kind of way, right? And so now you're like, oh, I just have to be friendly and just myself and so I think a lot of people have a very like, this is my work persona and then this is my not work persona, and to be able to take a little bit from each side can be hard.
Yeah, it is, because it's funny. I'll tell you something about me, Jasmine. Even though I do this every week and I have, in my day job, I'm dealing with people, talking to people a lot, but sometimes if I'm in certain spaces, I'm the quiet one. And people are like, wait a minute, the two don't seem to match. Yeah. So it's definitely can be different, and it's not that it's a fake thing, but it's just you show up differently in different spaces. So
I did an event a few weeks ago with Austin Channing Brown, who's another incredible author, and she was talking about that. She was saying, I'm at home on a stage. There can be a ton of, I can be in a auditorium with 500 people in there and I'm totally comfortable, but like put me in a group of 10 people and then I'm quiet and shy. And so it's very, like, people can be very different depending on the context and if this is work or personal. And I think that often that's surprising to people, right? You don't expect that. But I think that is something that often is the true for, in real life. And you're kind of figuring out, wait, how do I bring that part of me to this other part of me? And you're just not sure.
Because there's a level of confidence that you have in like your zone of expertise, so to speak. Right. But then when you're in another space, you don't have necessarily that same confidence. So you might, kind of pull back a little bit. Yeah. And these are things that Taylor is helping Avery with. Yes. Now, Taylor, as you said, they're opposites. So there is kind of this opposites attract type of thing where Taylor is like, she is the one that everybody knows, that, she's the one that, is out and about, that, she's dated a lot. She has a reputation of being this heartbreaker, as we've already talked about. So, when she steps into a room, it's a totally different experience for her.
Right, exactly. Like everybody knows her. It's a relatively small, because the book is set in, I didn't say this earlier, but the book is set in Napa Valley in California. And so, which is not a small town, but not a big, it's not a big town. It's like a lot of people know each other, right? Right. And Taylor's lived there for a while. So it's a, relatively small amount of people that she knows. Everybody knows her, even people she doesn't know of her, right? Because she's worked in a number of places. She has a lot of friends. She's dated a lot of people. And so, we've all either been that person or had those friends that everyone sort of is talking about, and she's that person, right? And so that's another thing that she kind of deals with, like people have this vision of me that isn't necessarily who I am. How do I deal with that?
Yeah, how do I deal with that? And ironically, 3 years ago today, I was actually in Napa Valley.
Oh, really? Amazing.
In my memories today. I'm like, oh, wow, how timely is that? Because my cousin got married and I went out there because again, I'm in Atlanta, so the whole other side of the country.
Yeah,
I went out there for a wedding, so I'm like, okay, yeah, I remember Napa, Sonoma, right next to each other. I took Uber riding around and things like that. So,
September is a beautiful time of year up there too. So,
yes, it definitely was. It definitely was. But just looking at this, that this is person who is like bubbly and they kind of know each other, like you said, they've seen each other around, they know each other, and and maybe looked at each other, but maybe never thought that they would have any type of relationship or even friendship necessarily. But then an opportunity presents itself for them to go on this whole idea of flirting lessons.
Yes.
So I love, the idea of that. It's of like learning, what does it mean to flirt? Or how do you flirt? Or let me show you, because, hey, I'm a pro. I know. I know how to do it. So let me help this person here. But in that process, you've already touched on it. The first thing is just to get for Taylor to help Avery get comfortable with even talking to people. And I love how this is structured in the book, how you have them go into these different places. It's always like a surprise. Oh, dress to get dirty, dress and you're sexy, dress this way. And she's not telling her where she's going and kind of throwing her into situations. So it's not like she can prepare or bow out or, oh, I'm not doing that. Yeah. I love the way you do that in the story.
Thank you. That was really fun. I kind of made a big list of places that I thought would be fun to try out for this, right? And the places that I kind of thought are like where there's always going to be people around. Like the first one they go to is a bookstore at a book event. And partly because, right, like that's a place that I go to all the time. I see one of the things that I love about doing book events is I see other people, like people making friends in line, people chatting with one another. Sometimes people come by themselves and then, you know, they chat with the people around them, or they come in groups, and, you know, there's always like, oh, I'll take this picture for you and stuff. And so I found that to be like, oh, this is a good place to start, right? Because like, and people are there for a common reason, right? So it's like, oh, you liked this book, I like this book, what else are you reading? You know, you have something kind of built in to talk about. But then it was fun to kind of think of other places they might go, and to think of like you know, I hadn't really, initially when I was writing it, I hadn't really planned on the surprise element of it. But then I was thinking like, that part would really stress Avery out, like not knowing where she was going, what she was doing. And Taylor would want to kind of tease her a little bit for that. And like, so she would keep that up. Right. And so it was really thinking about the characters and what would be difficult for them or fun for them to do. And so that kind of helped me come up with my list of places that they would go.
Yeah, and I really love it because, hey, I made note of some of the places. I mean, just to think about it in general, whether it is you're looking for friends or potential romantic partner, or whatever the case may be, when you start thinking about, I mean, let's say I work from home, right? So, or if you're in a small, you know, kind of your own little world, it's like, how do you start to meet new people or put yourself out there? And it is the thing, where are the places I can go where people are going to be? People that have things in common with me that, you know, maybe sometimes they don't. Maybe it's a chance where I'm learning a new skill, which we see that happen as well. But just really thinking outside of the box and going into these spaces where, and I like that when Taylor would take Avery to these places, you know, she would kind of like sit back and kind of like watch, okay, like I'm over here, I'm watching what was going on. So that way, you know, kind of allowing her to do her own thing and not necessarily hovering. So she would have to be forced into conversations.
Yeah, like she didn't want to be, you know, your security blanket, right? But she was always watching a little bit, but and then they would talk about it afterwards. But she wanted Avery to kind of be forced to try things on her own, and, you know, meet new people on her own, which Avery does not want to do, but makes herself do.
Right. But I mean, but of course she's trying to learn how to flirt. She's thinking about dating and things like that. So she doesn't want to, but she kind of has to if she wants to be open to these experiences. So that's just one of many. There's, I mean, we're not, well, for anybody who has not watched before, we're not going to do spoilers. So even if you've read the book already, please don't share spoilers. But, you know, some of the other things they do, they go salsa dancing, you know, they go do painting pottery, which actually I have a mug here. I did something like that years ago. It is a mug that I painted.
Oh, amazing.
Brown girl is brown, you know, shades of brown. But yeah, you know, doing things like that, axe throwing, which is kind of wild. So, I mean, they did a bunch of different things throughout that. And it also just, for me, I feel like when you get exposed to different things, it broadens your mind as well. So we're seeing that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Because like you want, I mean, I think, and one of the things that they talk about and that I was really thinking about while I wrote this book is sometimes you need to get out of your comfort zone, right? Out of the places that you go all the time where you see the same people, or, you know, to somewhere that's a little scary, right? You want to try something new and different. And so that's kind of what they're doing. And that was like fun to write about and think about. And also that was one of the things that made me think like, okay, you know, we all need to get, like, I need to get out of my comfort zone a little bit. I need to push myself to do different things. And so that was really kind of fun for me to write and to think about how would each of them work in specific environments, right? Like what would be hard for Avery? What would be hard for Taylor? How would they communicate with one another? That kind of stuff.
Right. Yes. So in the midst of them getting to know one another, because when we first meet, they're kind of acquaintances and over time they become friends and, you know, eventually more than friends. But we also get to meet their friends in the story. Well, I should say we start out meeting Taylor's friends in the story. There's Erica, you know, and several other, you know, ladies that are a part of her universe, so to speak, that, you know, we get to meet and see how they're interacting with Taylor and how they're responding to seeing Taylor hanging out with Avery. So I found that really interesting as well. Just, and we talked about this a little bit before we came on, but just looking at friendship as well and what happens in friendship when things are shifting or changing a little bit.
Yeah, that's one thing that I really think about a lot. Because I feel like my friendships have been some of the most important relationships in my life. But especially, when there are people that I have been friends with for a long time, things have changed in our relationship, right? Like sometimes we're closer, sometimes we're not as close. Sometimes, one person is going through something that you're just not as in touch with everybody else, and you're not reaching out as much or whatever. And so I think that's one thing that, like, I think people don't really talk enough about. There's a lot of conversation about communication in like romantic relationships, but communication in friendships is really important too. And I think that's one thing that I really wanted to talk about in this book, is like how important it is to really figure, if you want that friendship to continue, you have to communicate with one another, or to like figure out a way forward. And so that was something that I really wanted to talk about here.
Because yes, I mean, things definitely change as people are in different stages of life, and we see that with Erica, she's married and, starting a family and all of this, and Taylor and her are, even though they've been longtime friends, they're on two totally different pages. And it's like, how, do you navigate that? How do you, talk about how you're feeling? If, I'm not talking to you as much as I used to, do you take offense to that? Or do you try to, have some level of understanding that maybe people are in different spaces?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's hard, especially if you feel like, because there's a little bit of like, Taylor sort of feels like she's been left behind. And so it's hard because sometimes your feelings are hurt for reasons that it's hard for you to even communicate to yourself. So it's then hard to say that to someone else, right? Like, I feel bad because you've done these things that I know you're not doing at me, but it makes me feel bad, right? And so how do you say that? How do you even talk about that? And so I think that's one thing that I really, things aren't always cut and dry, and there's not really one person is wrong, one person is right. It's just, you have to figure out how to make it work. And I think that's one thing that I really thought about in this book.
Yeah, even though I saw some people that, they didn't like Erica, and she wasn't likable for much of the book, just because of different things that were happening. But then we're also seeing Taylor like kind of grapple with who she is. Right. And who she wants to be, because yes, she's sure and confident in herself in some ways, but she is that person who has been kind of like love them and leave them. That she's gotten this reputation of being this type of person, and so people look at her that way. And she's trying to expand and maybe not be that anymore, but people are still putting her in that box.
Right, exactly. And that's also one thing I wanted to think about, because sometimes if this ever happened, like you're in a situation with friends who you've known for a really long time, but sometimes they still think of you as exactly who you were then, right? Or like, even like with my family, right? I come from a very big family, and sometimes when we're all together, everybody thinks of each other in those roles you were in 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? And you're like, well, but I've grown up now, like I'm different. Right. And even if you do still have those little bits of personality in you, you're different. And so it's hard to kind of figure out, how do I push back against that? How do I tell them, please don't only think of me in that way. Right. There's more to me than that. Right. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, that definitely can be a struggle. So we're looking at this, long-term friendship, but then with Avery, we get to see a budding friendship, which also speaks to, what I was saying a few minutes ago, that, when you go out and you explore new things, you get to meet new people and perhaps embrace new friendships. A lot of people like no new friends after a certain age, but that's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah.
And, being able to see Avery explore new friendships.
Yeah, I think, because Avery really Avery lives, and this was something that I really thought about, right? Like Avery lives in the same place that she grew up. And I think, and as a person who also lives in the same place where they grew up, you can get very, you go to the same places all the time, you know where it is, but you get kind of very stuck in, certain places that you go to. You're not going outside of your comfort zone, right? And so I've really tried to make myself like go to new places or meet new people, but that can be hard when you're so used to, oh well, but I go there for this, why would I go anywhere else, or or that kind of thing. And so Avery kind of has to make herself figure out, like, how do I become an adult in this town that I grew up, and not just the person that I was growing up. And she grew up there and left and then came back and then had a boyfriend, and so she met a lot of his friends, and so now she just wants to like have her own friends, meet new people, and figure out how to do that. Like, and I think that's something that I've talked to a lot of people about. Like, yes. I think a lot of people are like, how do you, especially people, in their 20s and 30s, right? Like, how do you make new friends as an adult? Especially if you're not in a, like, especially if it's not like at work or at school, like where are the places you go? And so that's something that I thought a lot about, like, where are places that adults go when they want to make new friends and then do something else, right? And so that's kind of also a big part of this book. It's like learning to, I think part of making new friends is like learning how to put yourself out there, right? Like learning how to say, oh, would you want to get coffee sometime? Here's my phone number, or like anything like that. That seems scary, What if they don't want to be my friend? What if they're in a no new friends part of it, right? But I think, but you don't, I think there's often not a lot of benefit unless you try something scary. You have to like kind of put yourself out there in order to get the friend or the fun or the joy that comes later.
Right. And I definitely love it in this book. So we're seeing it from both sides, friendship as well as, ideas about romantic relationships and things like that. So, of course, this is a romance story, and, we are talking about Flirting Lessons. So, just real quick sidebar. Before I forget, I interviewed Francesca Hoagie a little while ago in her book, How to Find True Love.
Oh, awesome.
There's a chapter about flirting in this book.
Amazing.
So if anybody wants to check that out, this is a nonfiction book, but she has a chapter in here about flirting and the importance of it and how to do it, a little bit about how to do it. So, but yes, so it's like we have two people who are attractive people, right? And they're spending time together. And as oftentimes happens, if you're spending time around somebody a lot that you're attracted to, eventually, there will be, whatever's going to happen between them.
Yeah.
Whatever's going to happen, whatever that might be. So, but even in that, we see kind of the push and pull of that, because they go into this whole situation like, oh, hey, I'm just going to help you learn how to flirt so you can get out there and start dating. And, and well, we didn't talk about that, but there's a reason why Taylor is not dating, not pursuing, intimate partners at this time. You have to read the book if you haven't already to find out why. Because again, no spoilers. So they're both kind of in this space of, oh yeah, I got time, I can do this, just hanging out, it's fun or whatever. But as they begin to develop a friendship, that's a thing as well. Like if someone is your friend, attracted to them or not, you have to consider like what happens if we go in a different direction in this friendship.
Right. I think that's often something that people are concerned about, right? Because a lot of times especially if you're not like meeting on a dating app or in a bar where you're both clearly there to, meet people, a lot of people are meeting out just as friends, right? You meet at work, you meet at school, you meet at a wedding, like so many different places, and you're friends for a while. Maybe you have friends in common, and then you're like, wait a minute, is this going to mess everything up? Like, should I even try? Will this make everything awkward? What do I do? And so that's, I think, a lot of like one of the big things that people are always concerned about.
Like what happens, and so we get to see that, and especially since they're just supposed to be on this particular mission. They're not supposed to be trying to date each other. They're supposed to be on a particular mission, and what happens with that. So that I love the way that part of the story plays out as well. Just like, how do we navigate this, and then once we make a certain decision, then what now?
Right. And what now?
Right. And how are the people around us going to perceive what's happening between us and all of that? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's right. Like, how will your friends react? How will the other people react? Like, how do you tell people this? And so I think that's also a kind of that was also very fun to write, to kind of think about what would, once it starts, what would the next steps be, right? What would each of them be thinking or doing, or what would they say to other people about it? So that was kind of a fun, like, how do I deal with this in this book? Who are these characters? Because that's also, for me, one of the most interesting things about writing is really getting to know characters well. And so figuring out how is like this thing going to affect them, right? Like what are the things that you can kind of throw at them and see how they'll react, and who they'll call, who they'll talk to, what's going to happen in their lives. And so that was really fun for me to kind of think about for both Avery and Taylor.
Okay. So since you mentioned about the characters just as themselves, so when you sit down to write a story, you've kind of given us a little bit of the background, how they were, included in another book. And somebody asked a question about Drunken Love. We'll get to your question. I haven't forgotten about you. But how we've seen them before, but now you're fleshing these characters out more and having them have their own story. But when you started writing the book, did you kind of know where it was going, or were they talking to you along the way, or kind of how did that work for you?
I it's interesting because I feel like I always have a little bit of an idea who the characters are when I start. And this time I had a little bit more, right? Because both characters were in Drunk on Love. So I knew a little bit about them. But I figure out a lot, like my first draft is really figuring out who these characters are and what relationship they have with one another, and relationship they have with the world. Like, I'm really thinking about who are their friends, who are their family, what kind of world do they grow up in, like how do they talk to other people, what does their living space look like kind of all of that I'm thinking about as I write. Some of that doesn't end up in the actual book. It just sort of ends up in the first draft, and then I don't need it anymore. But it really helps me build who these people are and why I care about them, right? And so then by the time I get kind of midway into the book, then I know them a lot better. But it takes a little while for me to kind of figure that out. I always, before I write a draft, I always start with an outline. Sometimes they're detailed, sometimes they can be, so there's always kind of a beginning, middle, and end, but sometimes it's real short and sometimes it's pages long. It just kind of depends on how I've come up with the story, right? And so, but there have definitely been times when I get to the middle of the outline and I'm like, oh no, they would never do that, and I'm kind of, because I came up with that before I knew who they were, and now I know them. And so it's really, so I always kind of want to finish a first draft, like knowing these people, like they've been living in my house with me for the past few years, which really they have been, just like living in my brain with me. And so then I can really figure out, like, if someone did this to them, how would each of them react? And like when they first come home from work, what do they do? Like, kind of all those little things, like I know about them. And so then as I tell the story, I kind of know who they would call, how they would react, what would be hard for them and what would be easy for them. Because what I want is for the reader, even if they do something, kind of out of character for the reader to understand why they did it, for there to be a reason, like, okay, well, Avery did this because she was trying to do that, or whatever. And so, and I'm also thinking about that too, because I feel like everybody around us, there's never one straight line of character, right? You're always a little different with different people in your life, or nobody does something totally predictable every time. And so I want to know these people, but also think about what unpredictable things might they do. And if they did it, why would they do that? And so that's one of the really fun things for me about this job.
Yes. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, actually, we see that with both characters, because there's certain things that they're doing along the way. Then, like, yeah, Avery would respond that way. Yeah, she probably would be a little shy. She probably would be a little apprehensive, or Taylor would be one to be one more forward, or things like that. But then there are parts where we see, in some ways, there are some shifts where we see Avery being a lot more forthright and saying what she thinks, and shocking Taylor. Like, Taylor, ooh,
yeah, I didn't get that from you.
Oh, okay. But it to me, it's like her finding someone that she relates to, and having a level of comfort and confidence in showing up in that relationship as her full self. And I like seeing that as well, because oftentimes, and you do touch on it, that we can be in relationships where maybe we're not showing up as our full selves, because we feel that it's going to be rejected, or made fun of, or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely.
But when you find somebody that you can show up in your full self, and whatever that is, whatever way that is, that that's definitely a positive thing.
Absolutely. And I think that for me is one of the things at the core of writing romance, right? Is like putting two people together that they can be their full selves with, right? That you feel like this is someone who's going to accept all the weird little parts of me, and think they're cool, right? I mean, I think that's one of the things that I like the best about Avery and Taylor, is that each of them kind of looks up to the other one in specific ways that the other person wouldn't necessarily think of as like, oh, you think that part of me is cool? Oh, I wouldn't have thought that, And so I want them to like not just accept, but really admire certain characteristics of one another. And I kind of love that about these two and their relationship.
Mm-hmm. Now, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but because, this is a same-sex partnership, and like writing dialogue or thinking about how they would really communicate with one another, was that different? Because, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, whatever the case may be.
I think these two, I think, communicate pretty well. And I think that was partly the different thing, right? Is that they, especially partly because they start off just as acquaintances and then become friends and then start dating. And so they kind of learn to communicate well with one another before there's anything romantic in their relationship, which I find like is maybe not always, but a lot of the case for women, right? If you're friends with someone, you know how you get used to how to communicate with them. You tell them the truth. You call them on what they do and what they don't do. And I think that works well for Avery and Taylor, because they can do that with one another, right? They can tell one another the truth and talk and say the things that they're happy about and that they're not. And, oh, why did you do it that way? That kind of thing, right? Like, my friends who've been my friends for years will say like, oh, well, why'd you do that? And they know, they're like, come on now. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And vice versa, you can do that with people, right? And so I think that made it a little easier to write their communication as they're dating, because partly because they're women, but also because they kind of learned how to talk to one another. And I think that's really helpful.
That is true. They learned how to talk to one another along the way. Also, you know, you didn't shy away from, and I'm not going to not mention it. There is spice in this book. So there is spice. For those who like to read books with spice, you will not be disappointed with Flirting Lessons. But, you know, even in that, it's done in a way that it's like I could be inside the mind of Avery, who is exploring and experiencing something different, not just a new partner, but also, you know, a different type of relationship and the things that would come up in that. So I thought that in writing, you know, her perspective, that you did it in a way that felt like, yeah, I could see a person going through all of these changes when they're trying to figure out what's up.
I love that. Well, thank you. I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, you know, it was really fun to kind of think about, because like Avery's experiencing a lot of new things. And so how would she react to that? What would she be thinking about it? Who would she call to talk about it? Right? Like what would she tell her friends and family and stuff? And so that was really a fun way for kind of me to think that through.
And you know that they have a community around them, you know, the people that they can't, on both sides, that they can go and talk to, and you know, and ask questions, or you know, bounce things off of, you know, and folks that are going to tell them what they feel, give them advice, all of these sorts of things. So yeah, it was good to see that, and like to be in that person's mind. And again, this is why I could appreciate you telling this particular story, because I'm sure you helped somebody in telling this story that may be trying to figure some things out, or is not sure, or you know, grappling with certain emotions or whatever, and they can read, you know, this book and see these characters and be like, oh, okay, now you know, there's at least a book out there that's saying the things that I'm feeling, and maybe I can't, you know, if I don't have someone to express that with directly.
You know, those are some of the, I talked at the beginning about how much I love reading, talking to readers and meeting people when I go out for book tour, for book festivals and stuff. And one of some things that readers say to me sometimes, that is some of my favorite things, is how like they learned from a book, or they related so much to this book because they were going through this experience and it really helps them. And I find that like, fiction is great for that, because I find that like you can feel the character going through this experience and like, oh yes, oh, okay, it's not just me, right? And I think a lot of times people don't like feel like I might be the only one experiencing this. I don't know how to deal with it. What do I do? And I think when you read it in fiction, you think, oh, okay, someone else has been through this. You know, maybe I wouldn't react in the same way, but I can get, you know, I can move forward in my own way. And I feel like that is just such a wonderful compliment, to, you know, to my books. And I love it when readers can kind of see themselves in my books.
Yeah, I definitely, because while again, no spoilers, but there are certain things in the, oh. I don't know, because I mean, a person who loves love stories, it doesn't matter who it is. You know? I love stories, and you know, just seeing people navigate something that's very challenging, no matter who it is, or you know, who you love or want to be in love with, or you know, have a relationship with. Sometimes it can be, you know, quite challenging finding, you know, the yin to your yang. So so.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think just recognizing that can be challenging, but you deserve someone who makes you feel like that. You know, you deserve someone who makes you feel good about yourself, and that even the weird little parts of you are worth celebrating. And that's something that I really love to write about.
Now this cover, I love this cover.
Thank you. I do too. I mean, I can't take any credit for it. The cover designers at my publisher have done an amazing job, but Drunk on Love also had the kind of silhouette cover, and I just sort of love it. I feel like it's such a fun way to do that.
Yes, I love and all the pink, of course. That's really good. So now we did have a question up in the comments. talking about Drunk on Love.
Mhm.
Hi, Jasmine. Love your books. Drunk on Love was the first book I read. Will there be any more books set in that universe? So I guess this one is one.
Yeah, this one is the second. And then I haven't started working on it yet, but I'm planning for at least one more set in this universe.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So have we already been introduced to those characters?
Yes.
Okay. I know you don't have to say no more. No more. But yeah, that's good. Yeah, I love that because I mean the series. And see, now I need to go back and read Drunk on Love because I read it a while ago. So I need to go back and so I can see how we got introduced to these characters.
Well, one thing that's fun is the very first scene of this book, which is Avery and Taylor are at a party at the winery. That's one of the kind of scenes towards the end of Drunk on Love.
Okay.
So they, Avery and Taylor are kind of in the background talking in Drunk on Love. And I kind of knew while I was writing that would be in this book. And so that was also fun. And also, that can get complicated, right? When you're writing a series, because you're like, okay, I have to make sure that it works with what I already said. So I wanted to make sure that like everything and the way it was said and the way everything was in the party was true to Drunk on Love, but also this, they're starting their path to the Flirting Lessons in the background of that book.
Okay, yes, but well, at least read the last little piece. Oh, yeah, there they are.
Oh, there they are. Yeah.
Because I enjoy Drunk on Love as well. So, as a writer, do you enjoy doing series?
I do. I think the biggest reason that I do series is often because when I'm thinking about a book, right, I'm thinking about, yes, these are the main characters, but also I'm thinking about who their friends are, who their family is, who they talk to at work. Like, what are those other characters like? And then I'm thinking about those other characters. Like, you want each of those characters to feel like a full actual person, not just like a foil for the main character. So then the problem is that I start thinking, oh, well, what if that character had a really, what would be that character's love story? And so that's one of the fun things about writing series is sometimes I fall into them accidentally, right? Like my first 6 books are all kind of one interconnected series. I did not intend for it to be 6 books.
Oh, wow.
My plan from the beginning was for it to be those first 3. And then I kept thinking like, well, what about her mom? Or what about his brother? Or, and so that's kind of how that happens. But it is always fun to be able to pick up a character who, may have been a little bit of a character from another book and think, what would be the thing that would get him to fall in love, or where would she meet someone new? And so that's one of the fun things about writing series for me.
Okay, it made me think of Brenda Jackson because she's the queen of the series.
She really is. Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know, maybe these characters will be around for many, many, many moons. You never know, you go to it and come back to it as well. So now I know that, this book has been out for a few months, but you are still like on the circuit. We talked about it a little bit before, how you're going to be out and like going to different places in the months ahead. So what are some of the places where you will be that people can come out and actually meet you in person, Jasmine?
Yeah, I will be at the Brooklyn Book Festival this coming weekend on Sunday, the 21st. And then the weekend after that, the last weekend of September, I will be at the Aspen Book Festival in Aspen, Colorado. And then in the middle of October, I'm going to Las Vegas for the Las Vegas Book Festival. And then I will be at Steamy Lit Con in Anaheim, California. That's a big romance book convention. So that there'll be a ton of other romance writers there. So that'll be great. And then I'll be at the Portland Book Festival in Portland, Oregon. so those are all and I will also be in Boston in the middle of October for a fundraiser for 286 Books, which is a kind of nonprofit to help kids read more. Basically.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So, and I like the fact that you're getting out, like you're bouncing all around.
Yeah.
get to see that. Now, of course, I know you're working on something else. So how do you, as an author, because there are people who are authors who watch this, how do you navigate like all of that plus writing and deadlines and all that stuff while you're also on the go?
It's hard. I think it's a real balancing act. I really try to block out periods of time that are just for writing. Sometimes it's not always possible, right? I'm definitely going to do a good chunk of work on airplanes this fall, which I am not great at, because I often, when I'm on airplanes, I just immediately fall asleep. But sort of I will tell myself, okay, I will do like a chunk of work and then I can take a nap or whatever. So I try to like have focus time for writing and then kind of focus time for travel and for doing other stuff. But that it can be a challenge, especially since travel can, just like being on long flights and getting yourself from here to there, whatever, can be exhausting. And so I really try to, if I'm going to have to get work done while I'm traveling, like, say, okay, you'll do this much, and then like not beat yourself up if you can't do more. This is just how much you can do.
All right. Hey, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So when you aren't writing or traveling to talk about the books that you've written, what does Jasmine Guillory do for fun to unwind?
I spend a lot of time with my dog, who you may have heard in the background. We're probably going to go for a walk right after this. I love to bake. So I often do a lot of cooking for my friends and family. And I go out to eat a lot. So I am very familiar with a lot of restaurants in and around Oakland. I go up, as you may recognize, because I write books about set in Napa Valley, but I go up to Napa Valley a lot to try out restaurants and drink wine. I was just there actually the past 2 weekends. I was up there. So yeah. Right. And I like to travel too. I'm getting a little vacation in amongst all of the travel.
Well, that's good. That's good. If you can, as long as it's not like bounce into a city and bounce right out, and you don't get to see anything.
Yeah.
And yes, the one spot I went to the Brown Estate.
I love Brown. Yeah, I was just there earlier this summer. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So they're such a wonderful, like, I asked them a bunch of questions when I was first writing these books, and they're so wonderful and helpful and really thoughtful about the wine business and what, how it has been for them as a Black-owned winery. And I really thought about Brown a lot as I was writing.
Right. Yes. And I thought about them as I was reading, because again, 3 years ago today, I was out that way. But yes, for those who aren't familiar, it's Brown Estate. One of their ones that a lot of people may be familiar with is Chaos Theory.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Yes. I say that's the one to put hair on your chest. It's
yeah.
I have some in there. I might go get some in a moment. Beetlejuice is another.
My mom always saves Chaos Theory for Christmas. She's like, our family's always chaotic at Christmas, so it's perfect.
Yes, Theory. That's some real stuff right there.
Yeah.
And then they also have their House of Brown wines as well. So I got to promote the Black winery, since
absolutely
wine country and all of that, and of course the McBride sisters.
Yeah.
Have their wines as well as my other favorites, which are the Black Girl Magic. So yes. So next time I come out that way, Jasmine, I'm gonna have to look you up and we can go.
Absolutely, I'd love to.
So I do want to thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. As I stated at the very top, it's been a while that we've been waiting to do this, just schedule-wise and things like that. But this is your first time, and I always tell people, once you've been here once, you're always welcome to come back and have a conversation. So I look forward to seeing you again and again and again, because you keep writing. So.
Well, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful conversation. It was so great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Now hold on. Hold on just a second. I'll see you. Well, see, his time or her timing is perfect, because I was just about to let you go get some water, whatever. And I'll see you in just a second.
Okie dokie.
Okay. All right. Well, that was indeed a pleasure to talk to Jasmine Guillory. I've been a fan of her work for a very long time, as many of you are as well. And so if you haven't had a chance to pick up Flirting Lessons yet, I definitely suggest that you get it. It's a great love story, and all of the things that we talked about and so much more that we didn't, you will find in Avery and Taylor's story. So if you don't have a copy, there are copies that you can get at the Brown Girl Collective Bookstore, which is just that, browngirlcollectivebookstore.com. It is attached to Bookshop. So if you like to purchase books on Bookshop, you can find that book there. So just by means of announcement, on Wednesday, we will actually have a memoir that we'll be talking about. This Is Your Mother by Erica J. Simpson. She will be here on this coming Wednesday to talk about her memoir. It's been getting a lot of good buzz. So if you've had a chance to read it already, or if you want to learn more about it, come on this coming Wednesday, if you're watching in real time, Wednesday the 17th, to see Erica J. Simpson with This Is Your Mother. A week from today, which will be September 22nd, we're actually going to do some poetry. So every now and again, I do like to bring poets into the room. Actually, my very first guest was a poet. So we're bringing another poet back, Joy in the Belly of a Riot, and that is Barbara Fant. She will be here a week from today. And so that's all for now in terms of announcements. Trust me, I stay busy getting a lot of your favorites, old favorites, as well as new favorites that are coming to the stage here over the next few months. So please stay tuned. And we look forward to seeing you again real soon. Take good care. Bye-bye.